It just feels a little bit different when it's game day. Welcome inside Big Ten Today. Rick Pizzo, Jake Butt. The time to talk is nearly over. We're going to do that for about 59 and a half more minutes. Then we get focused on Thursday night, 3 Big Ten games. Jake, so excited. You don't just see it in his face. You don't just hear it in his voice. It's the emotions. He's crying at home on Wednesday, waiting for Thursday night's games.
Hey, maybe not crying, but shedding a tear. You know, Rick, for 10,000 years, we've broken down our calendar into 4 seasons: fall, winter, spring, summer. For me, I'm a sicko. I love football. I have only 2 seasons: in season and off season. So yes, I shed a tear when football comes back around. Now I know what to do with my life, and I'm excited to break it down with you.
You haven't lived here in Chicago long enough, because then you would know there is a 5th season called construction season, which basically goes for 11 months out of the year. Our big story does remind us what Jake already knows. Today feels like Christmas morning for Big Ten football fans. The league officially kicking off the 2024 season with 3 Thursday night games: Rutgers against Howard, Minnesota hosting North Carolina, and the Illini getting things started against Eastern Illinois. Let's work through these games chronologically. First game of the season is right here on the Big Ten Network when Rutgers plays host to Howard. Jake, there's been a lot of preseason buzz surrounding this Rutgers team. They did get dealt a pretty serious blow with the season-ending injury to Mohamed Touré. But offensively, Kyle Monangai is back. They have so much experience, so much leadership. Now they need to put it on the field and show that some of this hype has been warranted.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this at Big Ten Media Days, and it felt like their hype has just grown and grown and grown since, and rightfully so. You know, they're not in the Big Ten East. They avoid Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. That's certainly beneficial. But expectations can kind of be like NyQuil. You know, like you take too many sips and it'll lull you to sleep. So this is a really great opportunity for Rutgers with a veteran team. I don't think they're going to come out sleepwalking, but make a statement across the locker room that this is going to be their best season they've had in recent history.
We know they are going to be able to run the ball with Kyle Monangai, and it doesn't really matter if you put 8 or 9 guys in the box. They're still going to try to run the football because that's what Rutgers does, right? The question offensively is the quarterback position, where Ethan Kaliakmanis transfers in from Minnesota. The great news, he's back with Kirk Ciarrocca.
Yeah.
And we've seen quarterbacks flourish under Ciarrocca that then struggle when they don't have him as the OC. So you have to think that maybe tonight is the night that he gets to show off a little bit of that arm that they've been talking about through all of camp.
Yeah, and the difference for Rutgers this year between 5 or 6 wins and 7, 8, or 9 wins is going to fall solely on the shoulders of Kaliakmanis, in my opinion. And you're exactly right. What I expect teams to do is what they did last year. They will put 7, 8, 9 players in the box until Kaliakmanis and this Rutgers offense can threaten them successfully down the field. What's so special about Monangai is he led the Big Ten in rushing last year, even with those odds. But just imagine how much more space there will be if they can get a consistent pass game. I'll say what's encouraging, though, is this was a battle in the spring between him and Wimsatt, but not very long. Like, he seized control of that right away. So I think it's fair to expect that there'll be a step forward in the passing game.
I would love to get your take on the injury to Mohamed Touré, because he's not just a leader. Greg Schiano said, and this is counting Kyle Monangai, he may be the best player that Rutgers was able to put on the field, and they're not able to put him on the field now. How, as a team, do you kind of deal with that when it happens in the preseason and you know one of your best players, one of your best leaders is never going to be able to be on the field with you?
Well, it's a challenge, but when you talk about that caliber of player and him going down, it's not just frustrating to him, it's frustrating to the rest of the locker room because they knew what was at stake for him. So they got a chance to rally around him. But this is a big storyline for the Rutgers defense because the other guy is Tyreen Powell, coming off a hand injury and then an Achilles. So there's health questions in that room. And yet I still say Rutgers, you look at the experience all around them, the D-line and the secondary, littered with upperclassmen that have played a ton of snaps. That's the benefit of having experience. They can settle things in. You won't have to rely too much on one player.
Rutgers 12-2 over the last 5 seasons against non-conference opposition. It's one of the best records in the entire country. They are expected to improve that to 13-2 with a win over Howard on Thursday night to kick off their 2024 season. A much more difficult opponent for Minnesota tonight. North Carolina comes to town. This is not expected to be a North Carolina team that challenges in the ACC, but they have a really good running back. They have a philosophy where they like to throw the football around. And late word from Minneapolis is that Darius Taylor, who suffered a hamstring injury a couple of weeks ago late in camp, is very questionable. We won't know for sure until the injury report 2 hours before game time. But if he can't go, I think it changes everything that Minnesota wants to do in this game.
Oh, yeah, it does for a few reasons. I mean, on the defensive side of the ball, it helps that you're not playing Drake May, the third overall pick to the Patriots, right? Like that North Carolina's going to have to replace him. But then there's also some serious questions with the weather as well. Like they expect some big-time storms rolling in tonight. All that lens is this is going to be a heavy run game, and you would say if Darius Taylor's in the game, I'd say, okay, I put him toe-to-toe with most backs in the country. But if he's out and UNC has their stud running back, Amarion Hampton, back, that's an advantage that UNC has on paper, which puts further challenge on this defense, already replacing Joe Rossi and bringing in Corey Heatherman. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity because Minnesota at their best, it starts with the defensive side of the ball. What a great benchmark test to open the season.
I will say Minnesota has suffered multiple injuries at running back over the last couple of years. It's just plug and play. They find guys from the band playing the tuba, and they come in and average 5.5 yards per carry. I think that speaks to the depth that PJ Fleck has built on the recruiting trail and in the development on the offensive line, and they'll need that again tonight. They will also need something from Max Brosmer, and we've gotten mixed reviews throughout the course of training camp as to whether Brosmer can be not a guy, but the guy when Minnesota needs him to be, the transfer from New Hampshire.
Well, he certainly put up great stats at the FCS level, but you just think about the jump from FCS, FBS, and then on to the NFL. You know, I played it the windows get tighter, the timing gets quicker. You have to everything just it comes down to marginal details, and we haven't seen him play at this high level. So he's got to be that much more sharp tonight. And the good thing is, though, okay, yes, Darius Taylor's out, but what helps a quarterback is not just a run game, it's a veteran offensive line. Minnesota returns 4 of their 5 offensive linemen, including left tackle Ariante Ursary that's a first-round pick, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman in the Big Ten. So those are good omens for Minnesota.
And they're an O-line that should love Brosmer. Now, he recently signed an NIL deal with a local restaurant. So what do you do if you have that deal? You take your O-line out to eat, and you do it every week. Good work by Freehouse Minneapolis. I will say this, though. That NIL deal is going to turn out to be very expensive if you have offensive linemen eating there each and every week.
Well, what's more expensive? Like, take those guys out, and all of a sudden they block for you a little bit. You spend less money on treatment outside of the facility. So I think stuff like this counts. Like, I think you want to take care of your big men, and all that they're going to strain a little harder when you're in the pocket. So Brosmer coming in, a new transfer. It's good to get on the good graces of your big fellas in the huddle.
I got to tell you, I love when you see these stories and then you actually see the receipt and what they consumed, because those O-linemen can eat at a level that is nothing short, PJ Fleck, of elite. And finally, Illinois is at home on Thursday night against Eastern Illinois. This may be a lower-level opponent, but Jake, when you start to think about what Eastern Illinois has coming back, the questions that Illinois has, the way this game sets up, Illinois is the favorite, no doubt about it, and a big-time favorite, but I don't think this is just a gimme.
Not at all. This is an extremely dangerous game, and just starting with the defensive side, Eastern Illinois returns an elite quarterback, a ton of weapons on the offensive side of the ball. So we can start with Illinois' defense, which the transition from Walters to Henry wasn't great. Like, they took a number of steps back statistically. And the number one thing for their defense to succeed is disruption. Sacks, interception, pressure rate. Last year wasn't good enough because in that defense, they're going to leave their corners on an island. These guys, unless you have Devin Witherspoon, which they don't.
2 years ago, they had multiple draft picks in the secondary.
And when you don't, you have to get to the quarterback. So this is going to be on their front. Remember, they're replacing the law firm as well. I think this game right now has to be won in the trenches, disrupting that Eastern Illinois offense.
Interesting to see how Luke Altmaier responds. He had ups and downs last year, got injured a little bit, was replaced late in the year, and the Illinois offense actually kind of found a new gear. Now he's back, and Brett Bielema says that last year was the kind of learning experience he needed. He can't be in the learning phase anymore, though. He needs to be in the leadership and production phase.
It was like a paradox. Like, at some levels, he showed some great things. Like, I mean, he was accurate at times. His completion percentage was pretty solid. But then you look at, took way too many sacks, way too many turnovers. Needs to just get a little bit more consistent. So the question is for him, how can he further emphasize his strength, also his dangerous running the ball, but eliminating some of those mistakes. Bad teams lose games. So for a team like Illinois, you got to avoid losing games. And one guy I'm really excited is Fagan, their sophomore running back. Came on really, really strong late in the season. We know Bielema needs to run the ball. Altmaier will benefit from not being the leading rusher to start the season as well.
That big, strong, tough guy that can run between the tackles. Brett Bielema has had a couple of those, especially during his most successful years. At Wisconsin, of course, also had guys who can really go and had long-time NFL careers like Melvin Gordon and James White. Those guys help as well. What are you going to be doing tonight during all the games?
I am
Other than watching,
flying,
obviously.
I'm flying. I'm heading out to Washington, so hopefully we got TVs on the plane.
Oh,
So, yes.
out to Seattle
Yes,
for
I'm
the
going
first
out to
game
the
of the
West Coast.
season with the A crew. I love it, Jake Butt. When you're out there, make sure plenty of coffee, a little bit of salmon.
Of course.
Enjoy Husky Stadium. It's supposed to be a terrific environment. Rutgers has turned into a great home field environment for the Scarlet Knights over the last couple of years. It's the first game of the year, and you can see it right here on the Big Ten Network, 6 Eastern, followed by Eastern Illinois, visiting the Illini in Champaign. Our pregame show starts 30 minutes prior to that Rutgers game at 5:30 Eastern Time. The Jonathan Smith era in East Lansing kicks off Friday when Michigan State welcomes FAU to Spartan Stadium. You can see it right here on the Big Ten Network at 7 Eastern. This game also marking the MSU debut and first ever career start for QB Aiden Childs.
We talk about it. I think he's definitely ready for this. He's a competitive player, and true competitors understand it's not going to go perfect every snap, and things are going to take place. There's going to be some really good plays too, but there's nothing like experience. And the guy's been out on the field playing big time football before. Just hasn't been on the first snap. We'll be there for him to get him adjusted, and we're confident that in his preparation, in his instincts, and how competitive he is, that he'll give us a chance to score some points.
Today's big stat brought to you by Hardee's, where there is good in the making every day from sunrise to supper time. No team in the league has a longer win streak in season openers against non-conference competition. You got all that, Jake? Then does Michigan State. Spartans have won 14 consecutive such matchups, 3 more than either Indiana or Maryland. Rick Pizzo back with Jake Butt. I don't think I'm overstating this when I say that no team in the league will have its success defined more by quarterback play than Michigan State, because that's what Jonathan Smith is known for. Aiden Childs comes in along with Smith from Oregon State, and if they are able to transform this offense, being led by a dual threat quarterback, I think they become a completely different team. I think if Childs struggles with the other roster issues that they could potentially have offensively, could be a long season. If he succeeds, I think they could be a little bit of a dark horse.
Yeah, look, the stakes are high for every reason you just said, and just go back to when Smith initially got hired, and there was a max exodus of all the quarterbacks on their roster, and everyone assumed it was Childs, but it was a little while before he fully committed. And all of a sudden, you have all your chips on the table in this young man's hands, to your point, Rick, but it also shows the value Smith sees in him as well. And I think this will get better in time. I think Smith is the right man for this job. I don't think this will be the best year in his tenure.
It may take a year or two, or 3.
Right, but it will get better in time. And it's not just going to be for Childs, it's the other guys around him. And one guy I really would like to I like to do this with the tight ends. Jack Velling.
Oh, I know where you're going here.
Jack Velling, a coming out party. And Michigan State has historically, they've done a great job of recruiting and developing tight ends. This guy is as talented as they've had in recent years. And Jonathan Smith likes to run more 12 personnel than what Coach Tucker did. So all of a sudden, you have some nice pieces. Coming out party here, see if they can keep that streak alive.
I just like to show you, probably can't show the camera here, but do you see what was on my page here before
goodness.
you even started talking about tight ends?
Jack Velling,
It
baby.
actually is linked to Jack Velling. He's a tight end that also came over from Oregon State, and I got to tell you, if you haven't watched him play, he could be one of the best tight ends in this league, and that's talking about a league that has tight ends like Lachey and Loveland and some of the best in the country, guys that are expected to compete for the Mackey Award as the nation's top tight end. Overall, how do you think he defines success, Jonathan Smith, in year one? Because I don't think it can be through wins and losses only.
No, I think what the first thing you got to do is you want to have a clear culture and a clear identity. And I just felt Michigan State was segmented. Like it's a house divided against itself cannot stand. I couldn't define Michigan State these past few years. But Smith comes in, and I think he wants to make this his team. He hires Joe Rossi to make that defense his defense. I think what we'll start to see is a change in brand of football for Michigan State. that will inevitably lead to wins. But I think you're right. I think he understands more wins will come in the future.
Are you quoting Abraham Lincoln right now during Big Ten Today?
Maybe. Is that Abe Lincoln?
I think so. Maybe our producer can get on that to see if we're historically correct. Yes, we get a check mark. Jack Velling, Abraham Lincoln, mentioned in the same conversation for the first time in the history of sports or political conversation. All right, so Childs is not the only first-year starting quarterback to transfer in that we're going to have eyes on Friday night, because Tyler Van Dyke comes from Miami to Wisconsin. Now, Van Dyke had a phenomenal first year at Miami, and then the last couple of years, he was really unable to find that same form and that same footing. Last year, Luke Fickell went with a veteran quarterback in Mordecai as a transfer. Till the injury, I thought he was pretty effective, had his ups and downs as well. What does Tyler Van Dyke need to provide for this offense?
Well, you just bring up a great point. What a big year for him in his career, too, right? Where it's like, at his best, there's a reason why he was a coveted transfer quarterback this offseason. And that's what Wisconsin and Phil Longo need him to be. They need him to be at his best. What happened with Wisconsin last year is they're implementing this air raid system, but their whole offense happened within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. Second fewest yards per completion in the conference behind Iowa, right? And you typically throwing the ball don't want to be in that conversation. So for Van Dyke, can you stretch the ball vertical? And I think they got some big bodies in C.J. Williams at 6'1", Bryson Green in 6'3". We know what Will Pauling can do in the slot, but you have to stretch defenses vertical. Then all of a sudden you have Chez Mellusi running through space. Everything opens up a little bit. So for Van Dyke, make the easy throws, stretch defense vertical, everything will open up at that point.
I will say, I hope one thing for this Badger team, and for Chez Mellusi specifically, just stay healthy throughout the course of the entire season, right? He's back. This is the very last year of eligibility after having a career that has really been marred by injuries. He could have been, over the last 5 years, one of the most productive backs in the country had he not been hurt. You just want to see him play a full complement of games at 100%.
When he exploded before he got injured last year, and as talented as Braylon Allen is, the dude looks like Derrick Henry. We all love Braylon Allen. I felt like Chez Mellusi kind of fit the offense that Phil Longo wanted to
I think
run.
the coaches were giving Mellusi more of the load than Braylon Allen, even when they were both healthy.
Yep, so that's what I would expect is you've had a year to recover. Let's go out there and see this once again. I'm excited for him, and I'm exactly with you. Just stay healthy.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Wisconsin. It is against Western Michigan. It is a Friday night game on FS1, trying to set the table in year two. That, of course, as we all know, is supposed to be the year that a coach makes the biggest leap when he takes over a new program, and it is year two for Luke Fickell in Madison. Now, Fox Sports' Joel Klatt offered up his preseason look at the teams he thinks will be part of the first ever 12-team playoff. 4 among that group come from the Big Ten, including his pick for the overall #1 seed in Ohio State. Klatt sat down with Mike Hall for much more, including story time in this edition of The Big Interview.
Always good to bring in Joel Klatt, a man who's such a giver. He once left a Cutlass Cruiser on the side of the road with keys in it. Also,
That's true. That's true. I can't believe you remember that story.
I remember. It was a good one. It was a good one. He's the lead analyst for Fox College Football, and he's good enough to join us now. And we could talk about your minor league baseball days if we want, but instead, I'd rather focus on the upcoming season in the Big Ten. Give me some idea of like what's going to make a successful season for some teams. So let me start with Ohio State. It feels, Joel, like the narrative is they have to win the national championship or it's a failure. What do you think is reasonable?
I think that to claim that you have to win it all is too much. So, that's over the pale for me. But to claim that you have to give yourself a chance to win it all, I think is absolutely on the table for Ohio State. I hearken it back to like what Tom Brady and the New England Patriots did. What did they do year in and year out? Give themselves a chance. That's why they played for so many AFC championship games. Now, having said that, I do believe that this version of the playoff, the 12-team version of the playoff, it's going to be more difficult once you get into the semifinals than what we've had in the past. Therefore, my expectation, my highest expectation on any team in the country is to get yourself in that Final Four, because at that point, it's a call, it's a turnover, it's a play. You just got to get yourself and give yourself a chance, and I think that's my expectation for Ohio State.
The Buckeyes and everyone trying to take the national title from Michigan, but it's obviously a clearly different Michigan team. The program's going in the right direction. Each of the last 3 years, they've either tied or then broken the record for most wins in the history of the program in a single season. but the head coach is gone, the star QB is gone, the star running back is gone, on and on and on down the line. What's realistic for them?
Well, and by the way, that list continues. By the way, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, new strength coach. The way that I've categorized it is for Michigan, everyone is different. And yet, the sentiment, in particular amongst the ranks in Ann Arbor, is that nothing's changed. So, like, how does that, work? Well, it works because they really believe in their culture. They believe in their ability to develop players, which you can't argue with after the last 3 seasons. You just can't, in particular last season, going undefeated and winning the national championship. I think realistic expectations for Michigan are that they've got to understand that self-admittedly they're a development program, more so than, let's say, an Ohio State, a Georgia, or an Alabama, or a Texas who just wants to come ready-made, top-tier talent year in and year out. Well, when you're a self-admitted development program, you're going to have little dips before the peaks, and we've seen that ramp up for the last 3 years for Michigan. So for me, even a little dip still puts them right in the playoff conversation, in particular in a 12-team format. I believe if you look at their 4 toughest games, they've got Texas, USC, Oregon, and Ohio State. I believe that they're going to win 2 of those games. If they win 2 of those games, they're going to go to the playoff, and I think that they're going to be a 9-win team as their floor, 10-win team as maybe their ceiling.
Yeah, that makes sense. A 10-2 Michigan team feels like they're in the top 12 for sure. You brought up the schedule and how it can be hard. I want to turn our attention to one of the new teams to the Big Ten, USC. Generally, when you welcome a team or a person to your house, you're kind and you welcome them. Man, USC's schedule, it's not the Big Ten's fault they open with LSU, but then their 3rd game of the year is at Michigan. Their 4th game is home against Wisconsin. They're going to have to earn it right off the bat.
Yeah, they are. Although I'm going to take the other side of that coin. I actually think USC's schedule is favorable to them. And let me tell you why. You can't just say that without saying why. Well, number one is you get to face LSU, which was a top 3 offense a year ago, coming off of a Heisman Trophy winner. When you lose the Heisman Trophy winner and you lose both of those wide receivers, Neighbors and Thomas. They also lost their offensive coordinator. When do you want to see LSU? Early, as early as you possibly can. That's the exact same equation that I would say for Michigan. When would you want to go to Michigan if you're a team that feels like you want to beat them? Early in the season, in September, when they still might be wondering about who their quarterback is, when they're still trying to get their feet wet in this juxtaposition of everyone is different and yet everything is the same. So that's when I would want to play those 2 games. Then they get Penn State at home and they get Notre Dame at home. So to me, when I looked at that schedule, they don't go back east to play a cold weather game after the middle of October. And they've got Penn State at home and Notre Dame at home after facing the teams that they need to early. To me, it's actually a very favorable schedule. And if USC is able to beat LSU, then watch out. Then you can see a clear path to a 9-win team facing Notre Dame for the right to go to the playoff. That's where I think USC sits.
Yeah, think of the narrative shift around that program if they win on Sunday against LSU. Yeah. I mean, that's a massive change.
And by the way, those 2, I don't think that there's a bigger game week 1 in terms of the narrative surrounding college football, and in particular these 2 conferences. The narrative all year, and we have to just be prepared for this. This is going to be the new style of college football, is like, how many teams does each of these power conferences get? I believe that we have power 2 conferences, Big Ten and SEC, and they're going to be vying for the most amount of participants that they possibly can get into the college football playoff. So think about it. These 2 teams are sitting basically in the same spot in their conference in terms of preseason narrative, right around anywhere from 4 to 5 where they're picked. And so they're on equal footing within those conferences. So a head-to-head victory is going to mean a whole lot moving down to the stretch. That's why this is such a big game on Sunday night.
I'm curious, Joel, since you brought that up, kind of like a very macro point about college football. One of the things that bummed me out when we went to the 4-team playoff was I felt like too much of the focus too early in the year was just on those 4 teams. Yeah. I'm curious how much you think the shift to 12 is going to affect the way we as media members and we as fans look at the regular season in college football.
Yeah, so to answer that, I would have to go back further than the 4-team playoff, because prior to the 4-team playoff, there were a lot of ways, mechanisms, results, levers that you could use to define yourself as successful. whether you were a program or a fan base. I think you would agree with that, right? A New Year's Bowl was defined as successful. You know, you would get to the largely this is the way that Wisconsin built their entire program. They never played for a national championship, and yet they built their program into one of the most successful programs in the country because they had avenues to define themselves as successful until the 4-team college football playoff, which then sucked all the oxygen out of the air in terms of that definition of success. And now all you could do was go to the playoff, or else it was going to be a failure, and that's not what the fans wanted, and the players were going to opt out of the bowl games. And that was it. So once the toothpaste was out of the tube, you can't put it back in and go all the way back. So what do you need to do? Expand within reason the definition of success. I like 12, maybe 14, because it retains the level of importance of the regular season for the top tier teams to get the buy into the playoff, but it also expands that definition of success. For instance, an example, I think that we are on the precipice of having a November where 25, maybe 30 teams and fan bases feel like they have a legitimate path to the college football playoff. That's going to be incredible for the sport.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking of it. Instead of 5 to 8 teams in November that have fan bases that are in it, you could triple that amount because the size of the playoff has tripled instead. And to put a bow on this, you don't think that the September games will feel far less important because there will be 2 and probably some 3-loss teams that end up making it in the playoff.
I think when you actually go about an exercise of filling in and predicting a bracket, you realize that this notion of a 3-loss team getting in is iffy. That's why I think Michigan might need to go 10-2. This is why Oklahoma, even with their tough schedule, probably needs to go 10-2, even if that's going to be incredibly difficult. Which means that the regular season's actually still going to mean a lot. That loss that Florida State had on Saturday to Georgia Tech puts them behind the 8 ball. They now basically have to win the ACC, in my estimation, or else they're not going to get into the playoff. So it's a balancing act. You want to try to retain the level of importance and the meaningful nature of the regular season, as well as expand the definition of success. And I think that we're in the right model. Maybe it grows to 14. Then you would retain 2 buys and not 4 buys. All of those things I think will play itself out. But if I know college football fans like I think I know them, games are not going to lose their importance.
Right.
They just aren't.
Yeah. And we look at the NFL, people still flock to games on TV and in the stadium in September, for sure. Final 30 seconds, I know you got to run. You have Penn State and West Virginia this week. I think Drew Aller is a fascinating college football figure. He had great numbers last year, but just that next level was missing from him, especially against the big teams. He's got a new offensive coordinator. What do you expect to see from him week 1?
I've always thought that he is a supremely talented player. I didn't feel like what was going on schematically was a great fit for his skill set last year. He is a strong-armed quarterback that needs to push the ball and threaten the defense down the field. And that's not what they did. In fact, when you look at their average air yards per attempt, it was near the bottom of both the Big Ten and, in a lot of cases, the country. That needs to change, and I think it'll change with Andy Kotelnicki, their new offensive coordinator. I think that this is a team I'm very high on. There was no team hurt more by the 4-team format than Penn State. In the last 8 seasons, if we would have had a 12-team playoff, they would have made 6 playoffs in the last 8 years. 6. And our whole definition of James Franklin and that program would be very different if that was the case. I firmly expect that they'll be in the playoff. They've got a schedule that's advantageous. They don't have to play Oregon. They don't have to play Michigan. So for me, I'm expecting a lot out of Drew Aller himself and also that program.
Nobody makes better points in college football than Joel Klatt. Joel, always great talking to you, man. Have a great time in Morgantown.
I'm going to go try to find that. It was a Caprice.
Oh,
the Caprice that we left on the side of the road. That's right. In Idaho Falls, Idaho. Old minor league baseball stories. They're great. We could come on and just do a whole segment of minor league baseball stories.
Next week. Book it.
Let's go.
Our Taco Bell countdown to kickoff now just 2 days away for Sharon Moore and the Wolverines. Michigan set to play for the first time under Moore as its permanent head coach when the Maize and Blue host Fresno State Saturday night at the Big House, 7:30 Eastern Time in Ann Arbor. And that is where we begin Statement Saturday. What kind of statement does Michigan have to make? And is there a statement that Sharon Moore still has to make after what we saw from him when he replaced Jim Harbaugh in 23?
I think the full. I don't think Sharon has to prove anything. And I talk to these guys, I talk to the players, and they aren't interested in proving anything to anyone either. They want to prove themselves right, which I think is a good sign of maturity. But to me, it's binary for Michigan. It's an if-then statement solely on the quarterback play. If it's Alex Orji and he comes in and he plays well, then what does the rest of the college football landscape think? Because we're kind of baking in a few losses for Michigan right now. We're like, okay, they're losing everyone. They'll probably lose to some of Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. What if they get quality quarterback play? On the flip side, it's if whoever is quarterback comes in and struggles and looks shaky and doesn't look confident, then all of a sudden we are going to change our expectations on the season. Like Michigan is one of these interesting teams where the defense is a college football playoff level defense. The offense is a bit unproven at this point, but has potential. A lot of it's on the quarterback.
Well, I'll throw another if then at you, and I'd love to hear your response. If Donovan Edwards stays healthy throughout the course of the entire season and can give them 20 quality carries a game, then
in the running, if not the offensive player of the year in the Big Ten.
Wow.
I think he's got that level of juice, because I also think what Donovan does as well as any running back is the passing game. And Michigan's replacing their top two receivers.
Terrific out of the backfield.
They're going to get him involved. And also, he can throw the ball too. I mean, Donovan's a guy that just can stuff the stat sheet. And, playing behind Blake last year, Blake was the first guy off the bus. That's Donovan now. Yep. That's Donovan. A lot of this offense will ride on his success as well.
We just had this conversation during the break. I believe, even if, to play devil's advocate, Michigan loses the 3 games on their schedule that right now they would be considered underdogs in, and those would be the Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State game, I think they still have a great shot to get into the college football playoff.
They'll be close. I mean, they need a team like US. They would need USC to beat LSU.
They need help on the outside,
right? Like they need
for
some
sure.
of these other matchups but it's a gauntlet. It's going to be fun to cover this down the stretch of the year.
Totally agree. Starting off against Fresno State. A little bit easier opener for Oregon. They take on Idaho. So much talk right now about Dan Lanning. Rightfully so. He's done an unbelievable job. One of the most impressive young coaches in the country. Dylan Gabriel steps in, so you don't expect there to be a huge downslide after the departure of Bo Nix. What kind of statement do you need to see Oregon make, maybe this Saturday, maybe the first couple of weeks?
Yeah, I believe they will make a statement, which is to back up some of this conversation we've been having around their program all offseason. Like when we talk about, you hear people pick their national champion. Oregon's name's right in there. Conference title, Oregon's name. When you talk about the deepest roster in the Big Ten, it's typically Oregon and Ohio State leading that conversation. And all of a sudden you go from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. Whole new set of eyeballs are going to be watching, and not just the Big Ten. Of course, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, the teams at the top of our conference are going to watch how Oregon looks. But so will Georgia. So will Texas. All the national title contenders want to see what Dan Lanning does this year. I don't think Idaho can or will challenge them, but how dominant do they really look?
You know what I love about Oregon right now in the entry into the Big Ten? They have not come in and said, well, we're just happy to be part of the league. They've come in, they got the giant inflatable duck floating down the White River in Indianapolis. They've said, we're here to win the championship. We're here to win the Big Ten and the national title. And they're not doing it in a bragging, super cocky kind of way. They just are as confident as a team should be that's had this level of success and returns what they return. I mentioned Nix is gone. Tez Johnson's back at wide receiver. Jordan James is back at running back. There's another back that was hurt last year that could be a 1,000-yard guy.
This team
is loaded.
Yeah, 2 great tackles, too. They go and get Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, one of the best. I mean, they are loaded on both sides of the ball. And I love the subtleness of how Dan Lanning approaches the question of, how are you going to adjust to Big Ten play? He says, well, winning football is winning football. And I completely agree. Oregon is in the driver's seat. Other teams are going to have to adjust to them.
Totally agree. Really interesting game in Iowa City. Should the Hawkeyes win the opener? Of course they should against Illinois State. But what do we see from Cade McNamara? Recently just barely beat out Brendan Sullivan for the quarterback job. Kirk Ferentz, not going to be on the sidelines. The 1-game suspension because of the recruitment of McNamara. And oh, by the way, Tim Lester comes in, and everybody in Iowa wants to see what this offense looks like because they're hoping it looks nothing like it looked like a year ago.
Yeah, so the statements are, I go back in my notes from last year and the year prior, and I just recycle. It's all about
rinse
the
and repeat.
offense, right? I mean, the defense is loaded. Maybe it's one of the best defenses in the country once
I think
again.
it could be better than last year.
And it always will be with Phil Parker. But it comes down to the quarterback play. And part of the reason you go make a change at the coordinator position is to get a fresh voice, a fresh set of eyes. And when I look at Iowa last year, you want to talk about completions. I want to go a step further. It's ball placement, right? If you're throwing a bubble screen, it can't be on the back hip. It's got to be on the upfield shoulder so you can catch and run. You know, they're playing Michigan State last year. They're playing some of these games. You got to catch the ball. Like the receivers and tight, they have to catch the ball. The offensive line has to protect and pick up blitzes. So it's little fundamentals in just marginal differences that will decide Iowa season. They're not going to be the best offense in the conference, but they don't need to be to have a great season. But can they improve? That's what we're all waiting to see. Can they improve offensively?
I'm waiting to see if McNamara is healthy and effective, because if he's not, I just get the sense there's not going to be a really long leash at the quarterback position this year, not with Brendan Sullivan waiting.
Yeah, no, there can't be. And again, part of this falls on the offensive line. They return a lot of talent, a lot of experience there. So
I mean, Logan Jones up front's one of the best centers in the country.
Right. So you know, they'd struggled to find that identity in the run game even in past years. And Iowa at their best, they control the game, starting with their defense, but at least by having a consistent run game. That's part of why you bring in Tim Lester. That's part of what you expect with an experienced offensive line.
All right, let's go to Indiana, because Curt Cignetti came in. He made a statement at the basketball game shortly after he was introduced. Remember, he said, Purdue sucks, but so do Ohio State and Michigan. I'm not sure you can make a more bold statement. That being said, he completely flips this roster, 30-plus transfer players coming in, a bunch from James Madison, where he had a ton of success. Their schedule is very favorable. What kind of statement should we be watching Indiana try to make this weekend against FIU?
We just want to see if he backs it up. Like, he has set the statement, to your point, right? He has set the expectations in Bloomington. And to me, when I think about Curt Cignetti, I just, if I'm watching that game, I don't think I'll be able to stay seated. Like, he just injects so much juice and life, and he's got so much fire. I can't wait to see what happens. But to your point, you're bringing in a ton of transfers, guys who he really likes, a lot from the FCS level. Like we talked about with Brosmer earlier, it's a different beast here now, in the FBS and certainly in the Big Ten. He has set the expectations extremely high in Indiana. I know the fans love to hear that. I certainly love to hear it, but now we got to see it, right? That is the game of football. You are what you put on tape.
I just always think a fan base has expectations about what a team can be. You can't really have legitimate and realistic expectations right now because you have no idea what this team is.
Yes.
It is going to look entirely different than anything you've seen on the field in Bloomington.
Okay, so the spring, we get to see the spring game, right? That was competitive. That was back and forth. It looked to the viewer that they are taking that step forward. It looked like they had an offensive identity. It looks like their defense is going to fly around. The communication looked in place. Now you get 12 guaranteed opportunities in the fall. Put it on tape. Build on that confidence.
And I'm not taking away from the great year that Tom Allen had back in 2020. They have had success. By different, I mean there are players that most Indiana fans have never seen before because they're coming from the different level and different programs, and then you're going to have to get used to them trying to gel in through spring ball and get it all in the field this weekend against FIU. Last year's statement for Northwestern was an unbelievable one because nobody expected David Braun, who was named right before the year as the interim, to do anything with this team, who had won one game the year prior. All the tumult after Pat Fitzgerald is dismissed, and then all Northwestern does is have a career year last season, in a year that no one expected. What statement did they try to make if they're looking to back up the improbable 2023?
That what you can see is what you should believe. Like that last year should be the expectation for David Braun and Northwestern going forward.
That's a big statement by you.
Well, let's see it, because I look at what David Braun inherited, and it was an impossible situation last year from his opening presser at the Big Ten Conference. You're just like, can I believe in that? And then they just keep winning in your head. And then they finish against a Utah team that's consistently one of the toughest in college football. Okay, and now you have the added benefit of David Braun was calling play, just because of the timing last year. He's calling plays on defense. It limits his ability to be a true head coach. Now he's, given up those play calling duties. I'm really excited to see, because you get the feeling when you're around Northwestern that is a team that loves one another and trusts one another. And I just think that counts for something down the stretch of the season. So I'm excited to see what they can do.
I'm excited to watch games on campus.
Finally.
They're playing
Let's go.
at Martin Stadium, which is basically on the lake while Ryan Field is getting
Have you
redone.
been up there? Have you checked it out?
Yeah, I've seen it. Looks really
Beautiful.
cool. Allegedly, they can put like 12 to 15,000. And they have the Wisconsin game, by the way. A conference game is there. You know how hard that ticket's going to be for folks coming down from Madison? Not that far a drive.
It's going to be fun, too, with the elements. Remember the Ohio
Yes.
State game a few years ago? It's windy. Now it's going to be really
Straight on
windy
the
right
lake.
on the water. So it'll be fun.
And they'll have a new cat in charge watching those games. Just got news on Thursday morning. It's official. Mark Jackson, who is currently the AD at Villanova, leaving that position to take over at Northwestern. He'll start next week. I mean, it's football season. You got to get in place by September 1st. He is a previous AD of the year, won that award in 2020 while at Nova, and also importantly, spent some time as an associate AD at USC, so knows the current Big Ten extremely well. Comparable institution at Villanova to Northwestern. Mark Jackson, the new Northwestern athletic director. Now, we are the best volleyball conference in the country. There's no question. Fighting with the SEC to be labeled as the best football conference in the country. And we get a Big Ten SEC matchup right off the jump. It's neutral site in Vegas. USC top 25, LSU top 15. I don't have any concerns with USC's offense. I know Caleb Williams is gone. I think Miller Moss can do the job. Lincoln Riley's an offensive genius. The question is going to be, does Danton Lynn, the former UCLA DC who went crosstown, make as big a difference as Lincoln Riley thinks and hopes he can make?
Yeah, it's really the storyline is both defenses, because these teams were like a mirror image of each other last year, where you had Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels both just putting up stupid numbers offensively. Neither of them could stop anything out there. But you mentioned Danton Lynn. LSU goes and gets Missouri's defensive coordinator, Blake Baker. And then I expect both defenses to be improved, but one indicator for USC is it's not just coaching. Their offseason program. Lincoln Riley said their team has put on a total of 1,400 pounds of muscle this offseason.
I'm sorry, what?
You should see some of these before and after pictures. These guys are, Miller Moss has put on 5-6 pounds. Their O-linemen have put on 10, 15. They look different. They look like a Big Ten team, right? And now you have a coach that's going to know what to do with that size, talent, speed. And I would go as far to say as Danton Lynn, Lincoln Riley is one of the best coaches in college football. I think Danton Lynn is the best defensive coordinator he's had in his whole career. So doesn't that make this really interesting? To your point, we know he's going to put up points. This is a chance to prove it, though. I mean, LSU, they got a great offense as well. They got a great young quarterback. Got to prove it. Got to prove it. Fun game.
So Mike Hall and Joel Klatt talked about how the narrative could change for either or both of these teams, depending on Sunday's result. How much does it change what you think of USC? Has a really, really hard schedule in terms of being a Big Ten championship contender if they're able to knock off LSU.
It immediately jump boards them deeper into that conversation. But as far as the playoff goes, too, just think about the breadth of air you get having a ranked win at this point in the season. If USC wins this, they'll crack the top 20. LSU will probably stay in there, and vice versa.
Well, I think they crack the top 15 if they win this game.
This is a huge, huge game, one of the biggest games of the weekend. So a lot riding on this game, and a big matchup for both coaches in Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly.
So wait a second, you're going to be in Washington on. Why don't you just stay?
I know.
Stay out west. Go to LA.
I should stop in Vegas.
You should not stop in Vegas. It's a terrible idea.
Is it in Vegas? The game's in
It
Vegas,
is
right?
in Vegas. I'm just saying for you to stop in Vegas, see the game, then immediately leave. Don't stay overnight.
Okay.